My name's Mark and I'm 25 years old. I grew up in a small town in Utah with my parents as an only child. It might sound a little abnormal, but I always had a great relationship with my parents. They were both professionals and really weren't around much, especially in my teen years, so I never felt smothered by them or went through a major rebellious phase. Life really wasn't bad. I graduated from the local college with the intention of becoming a high school counselor. I had loved mentoring in high school and even tutored semi-regularly, and always looked up to the school counselors. They seemed like real-life heroes to me, and I found that very appealing. After graduating, I accepted a position as counselor at the local high school that I had attended. At first I enjoyed it tremendously, but after the first year, it started feeling wrong. I lived in this town my whole life. I graduated college here, and now being back at the same high school just started feeling like a big step backwards. I was becoming more and more dissatisfied and realized I had to leave this town. I wanted to grow and experience more from life. Within a few months of coming to this conclusion, I had left my position at the high school and was feverishly researching where I wanted to go next. It was so exciting. Anyone who has lived in a small town their entire lives understands what I'm describing. There are mixed emotions. On the one hand, you are leaving home, leaving the people in the town you have literally been a part of your whole life, and those things bring sadness and lament. But on the other hand, you're getting away, you're escaping the bonds of old, and going on a great adventure into the unknown. And that is exhilarating. After a few weeks of soul-searching and research, I came to a rather unpredictable decision. I realized being somewhat sheltered and living in a very safe and comfortable community most of my life left me wanting to reach out to less privileged communities, perhaps an inner city school. I knew I definitely wanted to transfer to a large city. Basically, I was going for the complete inverse of my entire life up until this point. And then it hit me. Los Angeles, California. I have no idea why LA made so much sense and got me so excited, but it did. And within 3 weeks, I had several prospects that I was very interested in. So I bid my family, friends, and the only town I had ever known goodbye, and moved to LA. Culture shock was the understatement of the year. I found an apartment near one of my prospective high schools where I believed I wanted to work, but the conditions. I knew it would be different. I knew I wanted to live the way my prospective students lived, but this was almost what I imagined a third world country to be like. I hadn't taken into account that recently, in LA, thousands of migrants and homeless had moved to the city. Hundreds, if not thousands, of makeshift dwellings were everywhere. Tents, boxes, plastic tarps, anything that would work as a shelter was thrown together to serve as a home. The makeshift dwellings spanned as far as you could see, down every street and in front of houses and apartments. It was astounding. Drug use was rampant and out in the open. There was fighting and attacks happening almost every day. The police mostly stayed away and the violence mostly went unchecked. I quickly realized my idealism had gotten the best of me. I was completely lost here. After a few weeks, as with most life changes, I acclimated. I had been offered the counselor position at a high school very close to my apartment and accepted. I felt I could really make a difference in these kids' lives, and that kept me motivated to stay. Coming home was always interesting. Many from the homeless community surrounding my apartment would always approach asking for money or a ride. Most were not aggressive, but some were, and worse, they were usually high. It was not uncommon to find them trying to break into your car or apartment for that matter. Several of my neighbors had said that from time to time they would find that someone, one of the homeless, would make their way into their apartments. They would often find them taking things from the rooms or taking food from their fridge, but in some cases they hide behind a couch or in the closet, and are so out of it they think that they live there, and so they argue with the tenants. So obviously being on heightened alert was regular routine when going home, as was searching your apartment for wayward souls or missing items. But I liked my apartment. It was overpriced as hell, and the area looked like a war zone, but inside was quaint and homey to me. The apartment building was very old and smelled musty, despite my best efforts to freshen the place up. I ended up buying scented candles, which helped, and honestly, I love the soothing fragrance and glow from them. They gave the place a sort of fantasy vibe that really helped to calm my mind after a long day. That night it was no surprise when I woke to a loud crashing sound in my kitchen. It was the distinct sound of a metal pot hitting the floor. I expected a confrontation of some kind from one of the homeless, and while I wasn't necessarily expecting a violent altercation, I still grabbed the kitchen knife I kept at the nightstand just in case. Making my way slowly to the kitchen, I found a pot on the floor, but other than that, there seemed to be nothing else unsafe other than burning candles. I blew them out and went back to bed. The next morning I was ill, very ill. It felt like a flu. I called into the school to let them know the situation and that I may be indisposed for a few days. Afterwards, I made my way to the bathroom as I was very nauseous. I stood there heaving for a few minutes when I suddenly felt goosebumps on my arms and neck. At first, I of course assumed it was my illness, but then in the mirror I saw someone streak by out in the hall. I immediately blurted out, "You need to leave." I was feeling so weak from the illness. I knew I had no chance of fighting off an intruder. Assuming it was one of the homeless, I shouted again, "I mean it, get out." Only silence came in response, so I made my way out of the bathroom to peek down the hall. I could see the front door was closed. That old door is noisy as hell. There's no way someone opened it without me hearing. I slowly made my way around the apartment, checking windows and closets before realizing that what I had seen was most likely from a combination of illness and paranoia. So I made my way back to bed. I tossed and turned well into the night. I was feverish and sweating like a pig, but I was far too weak and miserable to get up for some Tylenol. It was during one of these fitful episodes I tossed and turned and then froze. Across from my bed, standing in the middle of the room, was a human figure. Immediately, I assumed I had missed this person when I searched the apartment earlier today. I called out, "What do you want? You have to leave." The figure didn't move. "You really need to leave. I'm very sick. I have a flu. Do you want to catch the flu?" I sounded so pathetic, but I was exhausted and at wit's end. The figure didn't respond or move. Then I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. I could see through this person. The figure was obviously human, albeit blurry, but it was also translucent. I thought surely once again it was my illness, the high fever, the fatigue. Of course it was possible to see things that aren't there under these circumstances. And then, it was gone. I say it now because there was no way an actual person moved that quickly and without making a sound. It was just gone. The fever dream was gone. The silence in the room was palpable. The only sound was the slight crackle of the flickering candles and the pounding of my heart. I'm a practical man. The mind can play tricks when it is under great stress or illness, and right now, I was under both. I had rationalized it away. I'm sure of it. So I closed my eyes and eventually fell asleep. I woke a few hours later and looked over at the clock, which said 3:14 a.m. My mouth was like a desert. I was desperate for water. Luckily, I had left myself water on the nightstand. I was still far too weak to get up out of bed. I gulped down the water and then lay back down. I had brought my hand over my eyes, and when I removed it and looked up at the dark ceiling, I froze in shock. There in the darkness, staring down at me, was a face unlike any other I had ever seen. It stared at me in a way that petrified me. Then it very slowly recessed back into the darkness and was gone. When I finally was able to calm my heart, I realized I was still frozen. I could not move at all, but unlike before when my shock made sense from the fear, this felt more like paralysis. I could not move any part of my body other than my eyes that screamed and searched the room terrified at the unbelievable situation. As I silently stared, a familiar silhouette materialized at the foot of my bed. Except this time it was not translucent. It was opaque, solid, and black. I could make out no features this time, but as I stared in horror, features began to swirl on the black head and slowly become a face. The face before was beautiful compared to this. This face was inhuman and was obviously pleased at my discomfort, shock, and horror, as a slow and maniacal grin played gently across its face. My heart was now a rhythm of constant deep bass as I waited for this thing to harm me. But it didn't. It just stared. It even stopped the hideous grin and just stared. It felt like hours I lay there paralyzed, with this thing staring at me, and then, as before, it was gone. I felt elation like never before when the mobility in my body returned, but I also felt an exhaustion worse than ever. I collapsed into unconsciousness. When I opened my eyes again, they were facing the clock, which now read 10:25 a.m. I shot up and sat upright in bed, looking around for any sign of what I had seen the night before, but there was sunshine through the windows, and even birds chirping, blended perfectly with the welcome sound of car horns and the shouts of the homeless. A wave of relief surged from head to toe, and I slipped out of bed. To my surprise, my symptoms had mostly abated, so I searched the apartment, not really knowing why, because I'm a rational man, after all, and obviously what I had seen and experienced was nothing more than a horrible fever dream.